We're gonna start first with some OSPO news, and then I will introduce the topic of the day, introduce the speakers, and last but not least, we will continue with group discussions. So about TODO news and OSPO news, we have a new TODO member on board, Itau from the banking sector. You can check it at the landscape of todogroup.org. We recently released the third TODO newsletter in OSPO News. Just in case someone doesn't know about the OSPO News, everyone can contribute there. And the idea of having this is to share resources and knowledge of the news of OSPOs in the last months, so people can just check what's going on there. We have a new mailing list as well, the TODO community mailing list, and you can go to the link and ask for an invitation. Regarding OSPO events, last week we have OSPOcon Europe. I had the chance to be there in person, and I was really happy to see a lot of faces there and meet in person. And I know on September last week we also have OSPOcon in Seattle. So just for you to be aware of this, OSPOcon Europe slides and photos are available already, and the conference videos. I know there were a lot of people that says where can they find these videos, because as you know, OSPOcon Seattle, the videos are already published, but people couldn't see it virtually at OSPOcon Europe. So the conference videos are already available at YouTube. You can go there and check them out. And in case people would like to share any OSPO related topic presentation that they gave either in OSPOcon in Seattle or OSPOcon Europe or in any other open source conference that are talking about OSPOs, we have created a new repo into the group GitHub organizations, and maybe you can submit a pull request there and have also a set of interesting presentations that people can go and check them out. Next, we have a new OSPO guide. This time is about creating an open source commercial ecosystem, and the new OSPO discussions, finding ways to easily search for OSPOs in a single platform. Another important announcement we are making in order to find new ways of collaborations and make easier for communities and individuals that are into this OSPO movement, we are creating new partnership programs. The TODO ambassadors and associates TODO ambassadors are going to be more focused on individuals, those individuals that are creating, are making valuable contributions to OSPOs and into the repo, and also OSPO associates for those communities that are working and making great efforts in the TODO community. So you can check them out. It's still work in progress, but you will hear news very soon about these two new programs. And last but not least, as I said, Asbology, everyone can contribute there, and everyone can propose new topics, offer to become a speaker, take part in the voting process of the topics that people suggest, and improve documentation in the repo right below there. So feel free to join and share your knowledge and thoughts. So now let's move with the OSPO topic today. So we have, as I said, our two speakers, Chris and Lawrence. Chris is from the Linux Foundation and also is involved in CNCF. and the Open Container Initiative. And for many years also, he served on the Cliffs Foundation Board of Directors, represented the community and the Java Community Process Executive Committee. On the other hand, Lawrence has 18 years experience producing analysis and reports about enterprise IT B2B markets. And he's currently managing research projects and writes a weekly column as an analyst for the Newsstack. And today we're gonna discuss the state of OSPOs in 2021, and we're gonna focus more on the survey the TODO Group recently launched a few weeks ago. So, Chris, Lawrence, it's all yours. I will just let me know when you want to move to the next slide, and I will do that. Okay. So, all yours.
Awesome. Sounds fantastic. I guess, we've been kind of doing this OSPO survey for, roughly almost 5 years now, and it's kind of been a collaboration, between the Newsstack and the TODO Group to kind of, come up with something to give people a little bit more data on how OSPOs are structured, what's important to OSPOs. It's just been kind of this missing piece of information for a long time, because people would ask, like, hey, how is your OSPO structured? Where does it live? How is it potentially funded, and so on. And so, this is kind of how things started, as a way to kind of answer some of these questions. And we've now built, a pretty good set of content over the years, and we've kind of been tracking progress on, certain indicators. And so it's kind of been fun to see this evolve over year. And we essentially treat it as an open source project that people could, contribute to and modify questions, add questions, and so on. So we're going to go over some of the kind of key findings, at least today. It is a fairly long, in-depth report that you could go download. The results are up on GitHub, but there is a kind of a very long PDF that kind of goes in to all the different, questions. Lawrence, do you have any kind of comments? Because, we've been involved in the collaboration for a long time.
I could talk about it forever. There's a couple people on this call that have helped out from time to time on the study. Eventually, we're going to be putting out some even more data in terms of how it's been tabulated over time. And I'm really looking forward to talking to people at the end of this about suggestions for what we could do next. And I can also say that I know that a lot of the organizations that have been trying to do OSPO research and create OSPO organizations now have reached out to us over the last year or so. Have used this research in their efforts. So that's something that's worth mentioning.
Awesome. So, I mean, might as well dive in now to some of the kind of results and key findings. So maybe Anna, head to the next slide. So, like I mentioned before, all this information is up on GitHub, including, kind of the data if you wanted to go play with it yourself. Lawrence and I plan to go over, I think, about a handful of particular, items to kind of highlight from the survey results before kind of opening it up maybe for a discussion and kind of Q&A with folks that may have certain questions or, ideas on how to improve this, because, there are certain questions that we may not ask. So, from, this is kind of our graphic that kind of shows kind of the main, kind of rough highlights that we've, seen, in the survey this year. I think the most interesting aspects, for me are, essentially, a trend where a lot of OSPOs tend to start out as an individual, effort, or, someone kind of, basically improve open source practices with an organization. And, this year we saw kind of a small bump in kind of, essentially the, professionalization of an OSPO, which generally means like a formally structured one where it may live in, an office of CTO or potentially a legal, department. So I think that trend continues to kind of, grow every year. And, Lawrence, I think from the start of the survey, we've kind of seen this kind of continue to grow, even though that the whole kind of state of OSPOs in general has kind of, expanded to include new companies, even, new verticals like academia and so on that just weren't there, a handful of years ago. Any comments on that one? Lawrence?
Yeah, just in general, that as the scope of OSPOs has increased, the definition of what an OSPO is changes, so that a lot of times when we first started doing the survey, let's say, make up the number because we have the data in the report. Let's say 35% of people said they had an OSPO, and then 2 years later, maybe the same percentage would say they had an OSPO, but what they meant when they said it was totally different. It was they meant this is like it's just about licensing, and then it's about a lot more. I think there was a survey that Finos did, the organization for financial services in open source, and when they asked a question about open source OSPOs, they had to include something about compliance and review, because that was the old term. That's more related about licensing. So you have to really think about it in terms of what the actual definition is and the purposes.
Yep.
I'm going to go on to the next slide. Unless you want to talk about some of the findings.
No, I mean, we have some of these bullet points that we'll cover, but yeah, let's kind of continue to go through things, and then we'll kind of open up to some questions. But feel free to go ahead there, Lawrence.
Okay, so one of the things that we looked at was, what are you trying to accomplish with an OSPO? And we asked about, what are you trying to accomplish and what are your benefits if you already have one? And one thing we asked was, so what do you want to do? What do you want to get? Everyone said they want to get innovation. That was the top benefit that people were getting also. That was the same across the board. There was a lot of differences based off of what type of company you were and what size company you were. And what we saw were licensing fees, that's not really the reason why you want to create, and compliance are not the reasons why you want to create an OSPO, but on a different chart, you'll find that that's really one of the main reasons why, main benefits that people get, especially if you're a large company. So there's a big disconnect in terms of the older companies that have had OSPOs for a long time. They say that's one of the biggest benefits they get is the licensing compliance. But that's not the reason why the new companies want it. So there's something to think about there. And then in general, things I saw were that small tech companies, they want the OSPOs to help promote their projects themselves. They're looking at them in terms of helping actually get new users for their projects, get new developers. And while other companies just wanted to have it create more culture. So very specifically, let me give an example. There's 19 OSPOs, 19 companies that were just education or government that are planning to create an OSPO. The number one reason that they wanted to create one was lower support costs. And that's actually, 63% of them said that versus 36% of everyone else. And that's actually counter to what a lot of the message that we want to present as a industry. But in a positive thing, they also 53% say that they also want to promote cultural change and interaction versus 37% for everyone else. So that's exactly what, if you're the people promoting OSPO++, that's exactly what they're saying they want to do. Versus people with OSPO++, they say that they're totally different than enterprise, than what people here about corporate offices care about, because they don't act. They're not looking to support products, and then the same data in terms of that. They're not looking to support products.
I think that's like kind of the historic, lesson is like, OSPOs are going to be different based on kind of industry vertical and, organization. Some will prioritize, lower cost of potential, procurement. Some will optimize for innovation. Some will go for DevRel and so on. And if you kind of look at this, so go back to that slide, Anna, on where the OSPOs kind of adoption by industry, technology, and kind of like telco and all that kind of has been historic, the largest adopters, of kind of, open source program offices, I think kind of leading, the charge, for sure. And I'm, almost every couple of weeks, there's always kind of inbound interest in, OSPOs being formed by technology companies to reach out and ask, for a little help. So I think tech will, has seen the benefit for sure in kind of many areas around, increased innovation, developer efficiency, and so on. Financial services, obviously, we're seeing a lot of these, OSPOs being established there. And if you kind of look at the TODO Group membership, there's a good chunk of financial companies that have kind of continued to kind of set these things up, and makes sense given how regulated that industry is. They could kind of see an advantage of having an OSPO to kind of manage all the open source software that they now kind of depend on, and even some of them are producing open source projects, which is a little bit still rare for banks, but it is evolving.
Sorry, Chris, so this is where I'm looking at it, and I think that for financial services, it's not necessarily growing in terms of like massively growing in terms of OSPOs. I think they're looking at it a little bit differently in terms of that than these other industries, versus like transportation, where correct me if I'm wrong, you also have had strong membership, right?
Yeah, I mean, automotives definitely, and it tends to be very compliance focused. So like, for example, it makes sense if you're shipping and creating vehicles, right? You're going to care about the software that is distributed, on them, right? I view like that sector as mostly kind of focusing on, caring about compliance and so on. But, a lot of these companies are starting to push and become, tech companies, right? They're, moving software development in-house. There was a recent press release by Porsche that basically, was like, software is one of our core competencies, now in an organization. Open source is completely, super critical to that. And, we have now an OSPO, at Porsche to kind of help drive things forward. So, I think we'll continue to see things, evolve depending on the industry. I think, OSPOs are still very much a nascent thing, and it requires kind of a lot of education across these different industries to kind of get them to understand why they would need one, what are the benefits, and so on.
So to move the presentation along, if you look at the next slide, in terms of I wasn't even looking.
No worries.
So I'd actually talked to that next slide already, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we could, the challenges regarding OSPOs, a lot of it is.
No, I didn't talk to that slide. So I'll let you go.
Yeah. I'll talk to this one. I mean, this is typical, like, a lot of just, from just ANSI data and kind of what we have in the survey, having a budget, setting up a policy, overall strategy, always kind of the more higher, items, for OSPOs to kind of think about. It's always kind of the first question where, hey, we are thinking of setting an OSPO. We need to kind of, develop an open source strategy that our, executive leadership and stakeholders kind of buy into. What are some examples you could help us? So I think that's always kind of a concern for folks. Budget also is always a major thing, and that's kind of related generally to where OSPOs live. Is it considered a cost center for the organization, or is it potentially, something else, more kind of like an innovative research type thing. But I think that's just always a challenge for an organization of how to kind of fund something that is like crucial to the organization, but may not necessarily be like a revenue generating part of the company. It's kind of just it's like security, very cross-cutting. Everyone realizes it's important, right? Because you don't want to get hacked or potentially run into issues there. So it has to be funded, right? I think open source kind of is very similar, where OSPOs are very cross-cutting in organizations. So yeah, I think the good information here, and would love to kind of hear what people kind of think of of challenges when we kind of open up for questions. But might as well go to the next slide, because I think we have a couple more before we're going to open it up here. This one is a little bit interesting in terms of, is your OSPO formally structured where it lives somewhere and people may have a title associated with it, or is it someone that is, has a passion project? He or she's, maybe an engineer and wants to, take care of and improve open source practices, right? And so we've been kind of asking, I think, this question for a couple years now, and it seems to be getting a little bit more formalized, where you kind of see these titles where there's open source program manager, director of open source, head of open source. So it seems there's a little bit more formalization in the role, that where it's a little bit more dedicated. Titles all over the place. I don't think there's any standard, what you would see in software engineering, where you have software engineer, principal engineer. I think OSPOs are still a little bit, looser when it comes to, title of the role. Next slide. And I think this is kind of the last one. We're all living through this pandemic, which has been a little bit wild. And at a conference this week, in person, meeting people face to face, crazy. We're doing OSPO cons and meeting people. I think the pandemic has basically forced the digital transformation of a lot of organizations out there to either adopt software or remote access. And our survey data just basically says that they plan to spend more money on open source initiatives this year than previous year. So 51% indicated that there'll be an increase in spending, which makes sense in my opinion. We've always seen open source thrive in challenging environments, whether it's like the previous recession. Open source companies tend to do very well, and just in general, it's even more kind of dominant as a form of as an option for people to kind of buy software and participate than it was at the previous recession. So to me, this makes a lot of sense, and it's something that we kind of asked this time around, given the whole crazy circumstances with the pandemic. Cool. I think that's maybe you want to kind of wrap things up, Anna, before maybe we open up for for questions. But all this information is out in public. The biggest kind of important thing is we depend on the community here to kind of help shape the survey. We've been doing it in public for a while, and if there are folks from maybe the public sector or academics that want to ask new questions and get answers for those, please send a pull request. We will probably formalize, the survey probably early next, year, sometime late Q1, before we actually go and do the whole push. But please, open up GitHub issues, send pull requests. We're happy to take new questions. But thank you for kind of listening, and hopefully we could maybe have a couple of questions before we kind of wrap things up.
Yeah, I will just add that there is in OSPOCon Seattle, there was an interesting panel discussions where Don, Dwayne, and Stromy and other TODO members talk about the new era of OSPOs, and we're discussing about the different results for this survey. So you can go and check them in the link I shared with you. So I'm going to stop sharing.